Today, we're basically going to be historical detectives. We're going to see how the story of a simple, everyday thing can unlock the secret history of a word you absolutely think you know. We're digging into those hidden connections between the physical world and the language we use every day. So let's dive right in.
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? I mean, on one hand, you've got an object, something physical you can actually hold. And on the other, you have a word, just an idea that travels through time. The truth is, you can't really understand one without the other. So we're going to follow two journeys at the same time, the journey of an object across the globe and the journey of a word through history.
Just look at this. On the left, a knife from the 17th century, a real tangible thing made of steel and ivory. On the right, the word mobility from a history book. We're about to see how the global forces that brought this knife into being are the exact same forces that radically changed what the word mobility even means. So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at objects and how they carry history with them. Then, we'll uncover the surprising, original meaning of mobility. After that, we'll see how one single commodity, cotton, changed absolutely everything. That leads us straight to the birth of a new political idea, the mob. And finally, we'll tie it all back to our world today. Okay, first up, the secret life of things. Historians have started looking at everyday objects not just as, static items, but as active players in history. Each one has its own story, its own journey, and its own layers of meaning. And there's a name for this whole approach. It's called the material turn. It's this idea that by tracing the social life of an object, where it came from, how it was traded, who ended up using it, we can uncover this incredible hidden layer of global history about economies, cultures, and even power. This image really makes that idea come to life. This painting from the late 1600s is like an explosion of the material turn. Every single object in this shop has a story. Where did that porcelain come from? Who wove that fabric? And where are they all going from here? These aren't just things for sale. They are the final stops on these huge global networks. So let's zoom in on one of those objects, our knife. The blade was probably forged in Sheffield, England, a huge center for steel. But that detailed ivory handle, it was carved thousands of miles away in Goa, India. Think about it, two artisans on opposite sides of the world who never met, who knew nothing about each other, somehow cooperated to create this one single thing for a European customer. It's a perfect example of how global trade was already creating new meanings, layering them together across entire continents.
All right, let's put a pin in the knife for a second and turn to our other journey, the history of the word mobility. Today, we think of it as movement, right? Travel, maybe even climbing the social ladder. But if you were an ancient Roman, you would have understood it completely differently.
Just listen to this quote from the great Roman orator, Cicero. He asks, "What is more shameful than inconstancy, levity, mobility?" He's using mobility as an insult. For the Romans, the word mobilitas, the root of our modern word, had almost nothing to do with physical movement. No, it was a psychological flaw, a serious character defect. So this is the key. To be mobile in the classical sense meant you were unreliable, you were fickle, you were untrustworthy. It was a quality that was associated with the lower classes, the mobile vulgus, or what they called the fickle masses. In a world that valued stability and order above everything else, mobility was a dangerous negative thing. And right here, this is the tension that drives our entire story. While the idea of mobility was seen as a bad thing, the reality of mobility was exploding. This map shows the early modern world, just crisscrossed with trade routes. Goods, people, money, ideas. They were moving on a scale nobody had ever seen before. The world was becoming incredibly mobile, even while the word itself was still an insult. Something had to give.
And the thing that forced that change, the engine behind all this new global motion, was cotton. This simple plant would become the first truly global commodity. And in doing so, it would spin a whole new world into existence, a world that desperately needed a new way to talk about mobility.
For centuries, India was the king of cotton production. It was a decentralized local craft. But European demand for these textiles was just insatiable. And the drive to control the supply of cotton, to make it cheaper and more efficient, would end up connecting continents and creating our modern global economy. And that change happened so fast, it's hard to believe. Europeans set up huge plantations in the Americas, all built on the forced mobility and labor of enslaved Africans. Inventions like the cotton gin just supercharged production. In less than 50 years, Britain's cotton industry grew 30-fold, basically lighting the fuse of the Industrial Revolution. This entire system was built on moving people, goods, and money like never before. This chart really shows the incredible shift. In the old system, everything, raw materials, manufacturing, markets, it was all relatively close by. But in the new system, every single stage of production is separated by an ocean. Raw cotton from the Americas is shipped to factories in Europe to be sold in markets all over the world. And what was the result? Well, places like Manchester, England were totally transformed into massive industrial centers. This factory wasn't just making cloth for the local town, it was the heart of a global industrial chain, pumping out textiles for the entire planet. And this new economic reality created new cities, new social classes, and of course, new kinds of crowds. And that brings us to the climax. The physical world had been completely remade by all this new mobility, and now language had to catch up. That old Roman word for being fickle was about to be reborn as a modern political force. So let's trace it. We go from mobilitas, the personal character flaw, to mobile vulgus, the nasty term for the masses, and then, in late 17th century England, a new, short, punchy word appears, the mob. All of a sudden, the crowded, chaotic streets of cities like London, which were filled with people drawn there by this new global economy, they needed a name. And the mob became the perfect term to describe these new, powerful, and often unruly city crowds. The word was now directly tied to physical groups of people in motion. And this right here is the proof. This is a political ballad from 1682 called An Excellent New Hymn to the Mob. This isn't just describing a riot, it's talking to the crowd. It's trying to persuade them. The mob, or the mob, was no longer just some chaotic force of nature. It was now a political audience, one that you could try to win over. And with that, the transformation was complete. By the 18th century, people were calling the mob the Fourth Estate, a new, unofficial but undeniable power in politics, standing right alongside the three traditional powers of the king, the lords, and the commons. The word that meant unreliable had become the name for a new political reality. So, let's bring it all home. We've followed the journey of a knife from India and England and the journey of a word from ancient Rome. And what we've seen is how their paths were totally, deeply intertwined. When you boil it all down, the physical movement of things, like cotton, steel, and ivory, literally created a new kind of world. A more connected, more urban, more crowded world. And that new reality demanded a new language. The negative psychological mobilitas had to evolve into the physical, political mob, just to make sense of this new world in motion. And that leaves us with a final, really big thought. We've seen how the mobility of goods reshaped language centuries ago, so what about now? In our world, it's not just cotton. It's data, ideas, and culture that move instantly across the entire globe. You have to wonder, what new social realities are we creating right now? And what new words will we need to invent to describe them?